Hello, everyone. Greetings. My name is Aliki Papas. I am the Communications Manager for IFES and GEDC. It is my honor to step in on behalf of Dr. Krishna Vadula and introduce our wonderful presentation today. It's titled Dealing with Digital Credentials in Higher Education Institutions and Their Potential. This presentation will be brought to you by Dr. Matthias Gottlieb. He's a Senior Research Associate at Technical University of Munich in Germany. He's a Deputy Editor-in-Chief of International Journal of Engineering Pedagogy and reviewer of numerous journals and conferences. He works now in current research interests are digitalization of business processes, business development, digital transformation, and digital credentials of higher education institutions. I will hand over the controls to him. Thank you, Matthias, for joining us today. Quick reminder to our audience, please, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and drop them into the questions portal in GoToWebinar. We'll be addressing them at the end of his presentation. Thank you so much, and over to you, Matthias.
Yeah, thank you, Aliki, for the nice introduction, and thank you for all having you here, and it's nice to have you here. As Aliki mentioned, I've done several positions, so I do not want to go into detail on that, but I will directly jump into the slide and the presentation. So this is a picture from Jean-Marc Cotier. There was the thinking of how students get knowledge in the future. So that was the vision. As we all know, we still do not have any USB sticks, ports to our heads connected, so we can directly jump our knowledge into our heads or get it out. So what happened in history is that we have a lot of papers, and it started at about the third millennium before Christus with papyrus, and we had these printing in 1843, and then it does not take too long, but 2007 we had the presentation of Steve Jobs with the first iPhone. So that was the switch where a lot of things come from just calling to having a calculator in your pocket. Just imagine that as I have studied 2003 in high school, my math teacher just said, you will never walk around all days with a calculator. So that was the first step where he missed the vision of the future. But nowadays, this smartphone or iPhone 13 at the moment came out and has more lines of code than landing on the moon. So imagine that just 15 years later, we have such a tool in our hands and carry it around all days. So how do we get from analog credentials to digital credentials, and what is the benefit? We know analog credentials, I looked it up at home, mine do not look so pretty. It's more made out of plastic as I got it. And we know that to verify it, we need a lot of manpower to see if or if not, this is an original. And it's always in my environment. So I have the opportunity to give it to someone or just leave it where it is. So if we want to transform that, we want to keep this. So you should be self-sovereign. What's your decision who you choose and show your credentials? But as I get into the thinking of what can be a digital credential and how does it look like, I try to find a picture, and in my mind I got a lot of imaginations which more looks like this picture. So I had a smartphone, it could be some data somewhere in a database, it could be a tablet, or what else. And if we want to improve things, we need some verification which should be systematically or automatically done. It should be fully automatically in some way. So I just get the presentation that this is a verified credential. Why is this such an important case? As we know, just to get some imaginations how many students travel. Only in Europe, the German Academic Exchange Service has about 100,000 students scholarships a year. Or if we look at MOOCs, so massive open online courses, if we look at the Hasso-Plattner Institute, since the last 10 years, they had about 11 million credentials offered. So imagine these numbers. Also see how what's happening at the TUM. We have about 9,000 modules. So imagine if you have 180 ECTS per study year. So if you have 6 ECTS per modules, you have a lot of credentials a year. If we look only at bachelor or master degrees, then we have about 10,000. So that came to us to the idea of building this project based on the Digital Credential white paper, where I come to later on. So looking for an infrastructure standard that can issue a credential, store it some way, display it, and be verified. We do not want to invent the wheel all the time or in a new way. So that's why we look at German higher education institutions. But if we want to solve some infrastructure standard, then we need to have a look on a global perspective. So this is very unique at this project. The most of the projects I know just look very closely to their countries. And you also have to get in mind that if you look at Germany, it's a federated state. So that means education is not based on German law. It's in some part based on German law, but it's also based on federated law. So it can be compared that Bavaria has another law for learning than Lower Saxony, or Massachusetts has another law than St. Hugh in Los Angeles or whatever. So there are a lot of differentiation in that about the governance rules. The project is more than mid-half over, and it's funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And if you are more interested, you can have a look on the DiBiHo website. So as we started with the project, we get in mind, is there any market which is necessary to build verifiable credentials? And we had a deeper look, and yes, there is a market. We got these certificate. edX, that's correct, but the logo is too broad. The signature is, it's our original signature, but it's a professor from Oxford or Harvard. It's not situated at the TUM. So there is some kind of market building these fake credentials. So we had a deeper look and had a look on how big is the market. We found a lot of pages. One of them is these. They just pop up and you cannot close them down. So if you close them down, then another one will show up anyway. So we need a verifiable credential. So what is the idea we had behind to build this infrastructure? We came up with the idea of an envelope. So on a meter level, you have just an envelope like sending post, which works very, very well, because we have a student which is a holder of the credential receiving this credential, and you have an institution, so which is issuing the credential. So you have two things. You have a sender and a receiver. So both of them are on the envelope. And if you put in the envelope data and then you seal it, then you have a verifiable credential. But how does it look in the overall process? We have an institution issuing these credentials to a student. But that's not all. The student has to transportate it in some way and to store it. So storing it on a smartphone is nice. But what happens if the smartphone is damaged or it's getting old? We all know that they have not a long-lasting time since paper has. So there must be a way of restoring it or to keep it for a longer period of time. And we also have to think about what happens if we just use the public key infrastructure. Then we have some kind of time or a certain amount of time when these certificate is valid, but that makes no sense because in kind of bachelor degrees, it should be valid for your long lifetime. So we deal with these in some kinds. I come to that later on. So if you have these credentials and it's some way stored, we have to think about how to share with a third party. So it's not just the export. The export of the document is quite easy because there's just a PDF or whatever on data you can create. And then you share it with a third party. So the third party just wants in the first time have a look, is it verified? For that, it do not need any data object. It do not need a PDF. It just needs the data of, has the institution issued this credential to this specific student? So you do not need anything more, you need just a check mark. So this is done by some kind of verification service. But as we all know, revocating is an issue. So to deal with revocation and using which technology is important. So what does revocation mean? Revocation could be mean because of some cheating on a thesis, then you have to revoke it. That's one point. Another point is you have done a mistake. The name is wrong, so you have to revoke it and then you have to reissue it. So very simple. As I mentioned, this all is based on the Digital Credentials Consortium. This is based on 6 countries and 12 universities all over the world. One is the Delft University in Netherlands, Georgia Tech, Harvard, the Hazel-Plattner Institute, which is also partner in our project, McMaster's from Canada, Tecnológico de Monterrey from Mexico, the UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, Milano Bicocca, and Toronto. What is so special on these building structure? As we sorted and invented it, we had to think about who should be in our focus. And the focus was it should be learner-centric because he wants to hold his credential and share it with other people. So that's why it's learner-centric. It should be standard-based on technology standards, which we all know. And it should be use case driven. So we do not want to have some product out of somewhere which no one uses at the end. So there must be some effective usage at the end. So we decided to build up 3 use cases to make these selling points. One is the TUM, where we look at diplomas such as bachelor or master degrees. Another one are the scholarships, because we need the international exchange. And the third is MOOCs, massive open online courses. That's where the open HPI platform comes into the case. But let's have a deeper look at the case of the TUM. The Technical University consists of 15 departments. There are a lot of buildings. However, at the moment, we have 48,000 students, roughly. We have internationally 38% students. So this means that we cannot have a look just on the basis of our national students. This also affects Europeans and international students from China, USA, and wherever they are. And it's a huge number. And it's growing. And as I started here at the TUM, you could not really find them in courses. But it comes traditional, and it comes to the point that each course nearly has not an option, it's more mandatory to have an exchange, because the exchange is fruitful for our life and our scientific work. So that's why it's so important. And what did we do was to build a lifelong learning student journey. So we have some learners, as mentioned, the issued certificates, and we need some accepting third parties. However, the issuers can not only be institutions like the Technical University of Munich. For a broader case, it also could be chambers of commerce or whatever that issue a specific credential or another credential, whatever it is. Could be project management, for instance. So as we had a look on this huge journey, we try to build our user stories on learners, issuers, and third parties. So I just show you some of them. I will not walk through them because you can read them anyway in the slides, which we will provide later on. We just walked through our sources, which we found in a literature review, which are mentioned in the back of each sentences. And we had revisited with experts and workshops to validate these user stories. At the end, we looked at the mobility of students. So what happened? In total, you can say everything is going west. We see a huge movement to the US and Canada. We see a huge movement within Europe and to Europe. There's some movement to Austria, but there's a lack of movement to Africa and South America. That's very seldom. So there's still potential. So back to the process. If we look at the process more deeply and go to the envelope idea, we need to sign this envelope to make sure that there's a qualified electronic signature. We had some legal frameworks. The OZG is the Online Zugangsgesetz in German, which is the Online Access Act. And we have something in Europe that's called Single Digital Gateway. Single Digital Gateway should make sure that European citizens have a digital way to make their administrative work done. So this is the technical part for the envelope. But for the data object, we have metadata. These metadata, the EDCI, comes from the European Union. And there's another standard called ELMO, which is a bit older, and it's invented from a private group. It's very often used in the northern countries like Sweden, also Netherlands. It's also used in Germany in some parts, but it's more for proof of concept if they work or not. Then we have something like called X-Hochschule, which is a national standard. They are going in the direction of ELMO. Then we need some content. So we need a semantic schema. And of course, we need some kind of identification, which is, in my opinion, some kind of public key infrastructure. By that, we have a lot of services of transport, storing, validation, and revocation, as mentioned. And on the lowest level, you have operating and frameworks which are used. So how do we come up with a good solution to this highlighted process? We made a workshop and just asked people, I'm sorry that's in German, but I couldn't translate everything. But to make it short, what needs to be adjusted is we need an integrative overall process to see what's going on, and we need some awareness and usability that students and issuing administrative staff can handle it. Other purposes were we can also use it for the private economy, such as onboarding portals, or for documents like the driving license. What should be replaced or where we should get rid of was quite clear. Everyone do not want any longer any paper-based stuff, so we should quit that. And from the combination, we need more general standards, and we have a lot of ISO solutions, so we need some kind of key variables, so we do not end up with n different standards for M systems and their dependency of their community of higher education institutions and their student information systems. And we had this, we went into the process into more detail. We really wanted to know, where does it start, where does it end? So we asked asked participants what it has done, what has not been done. We simplified the process in some ways. One is the identification part, because identification is something which you do at the matriculation, so at your university. So there's some process at the moment. It's not digital in most cases. We know there's electronic identification which comes up in Europe and which is from 1997, but it's not used really yet. So this could be an entrance of a full digitalized process. Another process we did not look into detail is the archiving process. Because if you has issued a credential, you have to have the possibility that if there's some kinds, whatever happened, that your credential is destroyed, for instance, a fire, then the institution has to reissue a copy of your certificate. So there is some kind of archiving. At the moment, the archiving is done by just having a scanned document in a document management system. So that's it. Then we go over to what is needed for the process. How can we improve it? And we looked at a lot of standards that could help us. After doing all that, we started to build the infrastructure. For the Technical University of Munich, we did it a very simple way, which is, to make it short, TUM Online is our student information system. Behind that, there's an Oracle database. So what we did is we looked at the central unit where they issue the analog credentials. So if they press a button to issue this, we have a watchdog just looking at the system when a new credential is baked or done, and then we start our issuing service. It's middleware based. We use a decentralized identifier from the student. So we have some central examination office employee who's looking over it afterwards and say, yes, this can go to the student. Then we have some protocol. We at the moment not sure if we use SHAPI or if we use DITCOM. There are two transporting protocols. We have to decide that. in the next weeks, but you can use both of them. We are very flexible at this structure. And at the end, we need some platform where a third party can have a look if this is a reliable and suitable certificate. So what are the potentials which should be done in the next years? We see a huge potential in semantic, especially for import. The export is quite easy, but imagine how many sys systems we have in the world and how differently they are situated. Some just have a separation of module catalogs with the exams. Some have it in once. So how do you handle this? Is still an open issue. Then we need to look for awareness. We have to gain digital knowledge, skills, and competencies, not only for the students, also for staff members to get to know how to use all these digital credentials now. There's no longer a printout. There's no longer a round file stamped on the document. It's just seen on a screen. Then we have some decisions on blockchain and databases. You can use both. I will go into that more detail. And I think one very big thing is digital micro-credentials for international long life learning and to keep these exchange running. So let's go a bit more into dive more into deep details. So what do I mean with the semantic? If we look what we have in Europe, so this is a broad overview. What we have a verifiable credential on the top where you have something like the envelope. The ELM and the EDCI I mentioned earlier, it's how do they fit together. You see there are a lot of dots around, so it's not clear at the moment. How is it totally verified? Does it work? Because it's all in a proving proof of concept or in proving first steps at the moment in Europe. And what we can see is that the density of information is increasing as more you go to the semantic layer. So the idea is at the moment to build something like a coupling concept to identify key variables, something like the smallest denominator, and then to build up the surroundings. So to identify a certain point of starting. To the awareness, I looked at gamification. Gamification has a huge potential on that. And it's a promising method to not only for teaching, it's also for persuading designs and how we better can educate, so we can gain knowledge a lot. And the market on that is impressive. In 2020, it was grown just like nothing to 77 billion US dollar. So that's quite impressive. And for 2025, some already say it will be 300 billion market. So it's impressive to see that if you see a full hall of gaming people and you cannot learn, not learn at that time. So you always learn something if you play games. So that's a very interesting outlook on that. If we look more international and what happened for lifelong learning, the student's viewpoint is central to the project, and we aim to consider all stations along each individual journey. So this figure illustrates at which point within an academic career, digital academic credentials could play a role, or indeed do play a role. From prerequisites such as orientation and language tests, admissions, applications for scholarships and study abroad programs, to credit recognition for intra-institutional and external achievements, and of course the final diploma. You can see that this particular student path is not merely national, but also covers the European and global level, as digital credentials must take varying academic developments, both temporal and regional, into account. The potential applications of digital credentials for lifelong learning formats are crucial to our endeavors. So keep it all together, digital credentials is more than just a course, and they are beyond lifelong learning. So that's why I think that micro-credentials are, from a European perspective, seen as certifying learning outcomes for short-term learning experiences. So as I see there's still an issue on this slide, I will correct it quickly, because I don't like that. So sorry about that. But at the end, they offer a flexible, targeted way to help people develop the knowledge, skills and competencies they need for their personal professional development. So we do not have that kind of courses. We have more a specification of profiles. So it gives more flexibility on the one hand. On the other hand, we have very specialized profiles, and we need to handle that in some way. The variety of providers is no longer just public or private, it's a mixture. Some are private, some are public, and they have different settings. They have shorter forms of learning opportunities than traditional qualifications are being developed rapidly across Europe and the world. These opportunities are made available by a wide variety, as I said. And it's not only demand, it's more flexible in the kind of learner-centric. So it's formal, non-formal, and informal learning. So it's not based on a specific institution. You stay there and that's it. So micro-credentials can be particularly useful for people who want to upskill or reskill to meet labor market's needs, or to develop professionally after starting work. So they need a kind of way of learner wallets to collaborate, finding different technologies, whatever they collect in their lifelong learning until they get a bachelor or master degree. Afterwards might be they go in a completely different direction. They use project management, they go into controlling mathematics, marketing, or just evaluation processes like new life challenges. So how to store all these data, and what are the differences? Why is this necessary? So we looked at costs. We looked at environmental costs, and we found that if you just look at sustainability reasons, you should immediately switch. We also looked at the cost for document set. We looked at TUM. It's very explorative, and it's not completely validated yet. So be careful on the numbers. But as far as we see, after 6 months, nearly each solution is better in costs than any paper-based documents. So we should immediately switch. Why is the cost set so quickly. This is because we need special paper. To produce this paper, this is quite expensive. It needs to be 90 gram, it should be a specific format, it has to have watermarks, it needs stamps, and so forth and so on. And it needs manpower for signing the signatures. That's why the costs are so high. And there's a lot of potential in the world. We have the Digital Credentials Consortium, we have blockchains. So there is a market already coming up, Diplomi, blockchain for education, and so forth and so on. But that brings us to the point that we need to look into more detail about blockchain and what does it mean for us to use this kind of technology. To keep it simple, you just have to look for the type of public and private, and then you have to look for read and write. And for the writing process, we distinguish permissionless and permissioned. And there are certain amounts how you can handle it. There are two very famous consensus algorithms. One is the proof of work, which means you have to give some work to get something, which we all know from Bitcoin. And the other thing is the proof of stake, which means there's a certain amount of persons who agree that this one can be written on the blockchain. So should we use it or not? Blockchain is a decentralized, chronological, updated database with a consensus mechanism produced from the network for the permanent digital securitization of property rights. Okay. From a non-blockchain perspective, it has to vary. We have a storage space, which can be divided in personal, hybrid, or third party. It could be in the cloud. Cloud could be separated roughly. There are much more, I know, but let's keep it simple and say it's private, hybrid, and public. And the storage location, of course, can change to centralized or decentralized storage. So what are the differences? On the blockchain, we have a public key procedure, secures new entries. Okay, we know that. Unclear, because from a GDPR perspective, we do not know all legal. Is a hash identifying or not? Some agree they are, some agree they don't. So there are some surroundings which are not clear yet because no one is really fully using it in a productive surrounding. That means that if someone is doing it, then we will get some regulations or legal decisions on that. It's partially unclear about the cost. One example is Bitcoin, but there are also others like Ethereum. And if you put Ethereum on a proof of stake algorithm, then you do not have the cost issues. So there are parts where it goes or not. And the interesting thing is you have the trust via this IT system. The trust is no longer from an institution or from an organization. So from a non-blockchain perspective, this is a huge difference. And the other differences are, you know that what the costs are, you have experience with legal and regulation frameworks, conditions. So that's always why there's a questioning about should I use it or not is more a decision from a business perspective. It's a decision which has to be made by a provider. They also use public key procedures, but it's hierarchy. It's always an institution or organization on top. So if we have all this, we have some future work, especially on the verifiable presentation and revocation. I just came up with some questions on that. One is, do we really need physically something in hand which is needed? And in my opinion, I came up with the idea, what do we want to present to our ancestors? do we really want to show up? Here's my smartphone. Please, yes, here noted or not. And there's a necessity of some kind of decorative certificates, I think, and some kind of end achievement which you can show around. And it's still not clear how to import it into a system. And what about revocation in a flight mode? If smartphone is in a flight mode set after it's still verified, then there need to be some mechanisms on that shows third party that this is a revoked certificate. And then there's some kind of idea, it's a verifiable certificate presentation as a service. So someone is doing it. At the end, we have some kind of achievement, and I call it the 3 V's because it's in German, it's Vertrauen, which is trust in IT systems. It's that means that we have to trust that what the IT system is showing me is correct. And there needs some kind of Verlässlichkeit, which is reliability of IT systems. So we really want, if just for example, if Google tells me on the highway that the other direction saves me 7 minutes of time, I really want that this is really saving me 7 minutes of time. I do not want to turn around in the landscape and recognize that it was the wrong way. And we need to change in perspective on IT systems, which is more in an ethically way, because if we trust an IT system and IT systems having some possibilities, however that look like, to make decisions, that means that these machines are having done a decision for us. Imagine this from a perspective more from the industry. If you look at the automobile sector, taking the decision of a car crashing into a group of small children or an old person, how would you decide? Now an IT system might do this decision, and we have to learn to get used to it. So that's what I want to give you at the nearly end. If you want to keep in touch, we have a mailing list, and we also have an upcoming event. It's our Moving Target Conference in Berlin. It's from the 30th of November to the 2nd of December. You get informed by these mailing lists or on the website. So now I'm so far done, and I'm happy to listen to your questions.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you so much. Very informative presentation. We do have a couple of questions from our audience, so we'll jump into that. Thank you again for the presentation. Our first question is, first a comment, very nice presentation, thank you. And what about authenticity and credibility? Will there be a specific body that is given authority to validate these credentials?
Thank you for this question. I really love that. That's exactly the thing what also is a design decision. So if you use a blockchain, then there needs some kind of consent mechanism, as I mentioned. So you need some kind of authority or governance to make sure that the credential is made by this institution, and that these institutions are allowed to make these credential or bake these credentials and give it to you. The European have an infrastructure, it's called European Blockchain Service Infrastructure. They have some kind of national contact points where you have to sign up and then you're in the system. But there's another option, it's called zero knowledge proofs. You can compare that a bit with, you might know eduroam, which is a worldwide network. So, but it's a bit different. I come to that point. So if I go to whatever, Chicago, from Technical University of Munich, I have here my eduroam account and I just log in there and I do not have any issues because we have already trust in the system. And so it comes from the system. That's one point. But the main difference of eduroam is as long as you are within the community, you have access to eduroam. But credentials do not have this point. This is still an open issue. Because if you leave your university, you leave the community. So there are some ideas of building some kind of consortium where you are a member of or something like that, like Deutsches Forschungsnetzwerk or whatever it is. We do not know that yet. I think that's a political decision.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering, you know, with all these examples that you're offering, is there an ability to make these credentials not only just transferable between higher education institutions in different countries, but cumulative? I think, in other words, people reference credentials to be stackable so that learners could potentially and eventually earn a degree down the line by completing X amount of certain certifications.
I'm not sure if I get this point right. As far as I understand, you mean it in a non-digital way, or how do you mean that?
I would assume that if we do end up having a digitalization of all credentials worldwide, is there an infrastructure in place now that makes these credentials transferable to various countries and stackable or cumulative so that one can earn a degree down the line?
Okay, now I got it. At the moment, that's why we use the Digital Credential Consortium. They use the W3C as building a technical infrastructure. From a technical perspective, they building these infrastructure, so on a worldwide level. So that's open standards they use. They use a JSON LD file at the moment. So to get more into detail, and I know that the Europeans have more the XML files. I think you can use both of them because you can transfer one of them into the other file. That should not be an issue, a big issue, but it's a lot of work to look all through all what variables if it fits completely, because it's not just variables. It's you have some kind of learning achievements, you have some kind of learning opportunities, you have learning schematics, and if it comes to presentation, and I think this is still a big issue because a lot of institutions have done corporate identity and they want to have their logo on the right corner, 10 pixels from the top, 15 pixels from the right, not nearer to some other logos and stuff like that. And you have to have some schema for the presentation to walk through this process. And I think to make some standardized, having some data and you have some presentation in your system, because I think that's the way we should think of. We should think of a completely digital way at this part. Because if you print it out later on, we have not the big achievement we want. Then you still lose energy, which you do not need. So we really have to look at the users. What do they need? They need a grade, they need the subject, they need is it valid or not. So they need a check mark and they want to have it in the system. And then there's some person of might be in the human resources. They want to have a look at into more details, some description of it. Is this the right fit? But you can think it further. If you have a fully structured text, fully digital, that means that you can use artificial intelligence to make profiles. This means you can not only make profiles for the students, you can also make predictive profiles, what could be interesting for the market. So you can support students with profiling to the market. And you can go even beyond. If you have national platforms or ecosystems looking at profiles, they can predict their market, having a look what skills are needed, and can be much more in time adjust their systems to the necessary profiles and skills and competencies, whatever we learn all day.
Very interesting. Excellent. Thank you. I know we do have a special guest, Dr. Hanno Hortz. He is IFE's executive committee member, and he submitted a question. I would love to make him a panelist so that he could actually speak with you on this. Hello, Hanno. Can you hear us? Can you go ahead and ask your question live? You may be muted.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask it for him. So he submits, can MC overcome the obvious contradiction between formally and non-formally acquired qualification? What is your opinion?
Whew, that's a really good question. Thank you, Hanno, for that question. I love it. I think that digital credential have the possibility or the potential to overcome this issue, because we already see issuing credentials which are more non-formal. You might see it on platforms. There are a couple out. One you might know, Microsoft LinkedIn. They issue credentials. I've not seen them yet in any onboarding documents, but they do a pretty interesting job. And I see that we have some kinds of certificates that are already have the qualification. So they have a kind of stamp like the TÜV in Germany, or Axelsos is a very famous company on that. They offer credentials for project management, for instance, or ITIL and stuff like that. So they are credentials already out there, which are do not have the high formal standards of higher education institutions. And we always have to keep in mind what is necessary for the situation. What do we really need? We need some kind of fundamentals. And I think fundament and very good educations are done by higher education institutions in Germany. They do a pretty good job. And you also see that in other countries. Just to mention some of them, Harvard, MIT, and Yale, whatever, you can go down the whole list. Oxford, Cambridge, there are plenty out there. That's really, really high level. And so that's specialist. We need that specialist. And I think we need for the future general specialists. So they need some way of connections. So these specialists can talk to each other and to get a more fruitful conversation. I think Hanno is online now. So does it answer your question?
No, you looks like you're still muted.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. I see I'm online now. Thank you so much, Matthias. Sorry about it, but you got my question. And let us keep us in contact about this subject, please.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. All right, and one more question. I know we're nearing the end. And what do you think is the biggest benefit of digital credentials?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think the biggest benefit we have is that we get rid of all these administrative processes and keep people in a more familiar work what they really need to do. So, and they can more concentrate on their jobs. At the moment, they are stuffed with thousands of improvements, and that's not necessary. And we can get faster exchange. So that means that an exchange between our community and how lifelong learning should be work, in my opinion, is that I have done some certificates. I want to need some certificates from another institution to get more insights, to get these exchange, which is very fruitful. And we have learned in scientific that we need these exchange. And even during this pandemic, we learned even more to be having exchanges. The interaction in person is so important. You learn so much on the surroundings. There was a small smile. There was something on the left, on the right. You do not see that on the camera. And so this is a very fruitful exchange, and this will go much easier for students in the future. So the international exchange will we benefit very much of that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthias. I'm introducing Dr. Hans Hoyer. He has some final words. I do want to remind our participants today that we're furthering this conversation. Next week, we do have our second webinar with the GEDC Industry Forum colleagues in partnership with Petrus Communications. Ms. Jen Bradford from Siemens will be facilitating the dialogue on micro-credentials for macro learning. I will drop the link in the chat for you all to register and attend. Join us next week. Thank you, Matthias. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you so much, Aliki. Matthias, recht herzlichen Dank. I really thank you for your outstanding presentation, and we will share it with our global community. And as you know, we work very closely with, of course, our friends in India, IUCE, and of course, HIFIS and GDC are sponsoring and putting this together. I just want to make a couple of comments moving beyond your fabulous presentation, is just to remind all of you, also as Aliki just said, our forthcoming webinar where GDC works closely with the different corporate colleagues globally, our industry forum. We are having several leading up to our global conference this November in Cape Town, and we'll have an event related to the GDC industry forum at that time in preparation for our conference next year in China with our friends of SASTEC in Shenzhen. I just want to let you know that. The other thing is also several webinars continuing to focus on bringing women engineering leaders together through our series of Rising to the Top. And we'll have a couple of workshops moving on to Cape Town. Again, we'll bring those leaders together in person, hopefully as many as possible. I'm very pleased to share with you that we are working closely with leaders in the MENA Arab world region and Southeast Asia, writing our 5th and 6th edition of Rising to the Top. And we hope to publish toward the end of the year. And we have the wonderful support of many of our, or several of our corporate colleagues. I just want you to be aware of that. All of us are longing to come together in person. And, you know, little by little, we are taking steps. And as Matthias said, in Berlin, he'll have a wonderful conference. I know Hanno and Michael Auer is working on bringing us together in Vienna in September. And of course, I look forward very much to be there with many friends. Yes, it's wonderful to see each other like this here online. Frankly, I prefer to be able to sit next to my sisters and brothers and have conversations and so forth. And we are all looking forward to that. And I'm very pleased. We're bringing IFES GDC members together right now at the AACE conference at the end of the month in Minneapolis, and I'm very, very pleased about that. The other thing, just very briefly, that we're working on, again, we're working on the Duncan Fraser Award of IFES and looking forward to receive more applicants. The Diversity Award, working in very close partnership with our friends of Siemens and George Mason University, and the Sustainability Award, the first that we are having this year, working in partnership with our friends of Kwanzaa in Canada. I just want to let you know about that. And above all, stay healthy, stay safe. Peace be with you in this very difficult, complex reality that we all live in, and particularly in Europe, which is close to Mateos, Hanno, and myself per se, that we are obviously in close touch with many friends and colleagues there. Looking forward to see all of you in November in Cape Town. And we are planning with that. I'm working with wonderful colleagues that are excited to host you, and we have a dynamic, exciting program. Thank you, and peace be with all of you. Thank you, Mateos, for your wonderful presentation. Bye-bye.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.